Isabel Sterling, the Ice Queen CEO of Sterling Industries, got blackout drunk and married me. It was the start of a messy, improbable marriage. No one in her circle thought I was worthy, and they even started a betting pool on when I'd be kicked to the curb. Her biggest admirer, Carter Vance, upped the ante, betting I wouldn't last a month. What they didn't know was that this was all just an experiment for me. I was just trying to live a normal life. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm unemployed. Well, that's the label my new wife and her friends have given me. A month ago, Isabel Sterling, a billionaire who was a regular on the cover of Forbes, had a little too much to celebrate at her own success party. In her drunken haze, she dragged me, a waiter hired for the night, down to the nearest courthouse. The next morning, staring at the two glaringly official marriage certificates on the nightstand and the peacefully sleeping CO beside me, I found myself in a contemplative mood. Should I tell her that her grand, drunken proposal, the one where she promised to give me a publicly traded company, was something I could arrange with a single phone call? Nah, too much hassle. I was just here to experience life as a regular person. When Isabel woke up, she handled it with the composure you'd expect from a titan of industry. No screaming, no questions, not even a hint of panic. She just looked at me calmly and handed me a folder. Ethan Cole, right? Her voice was crisp, like ice clinking in a glass. We're married. That's a fact. I'm not one to run from my responsibilities. I took the folder and scanned the documents. A prenuptial agreement and a non-disclosure agreement. The gist was this. For the duration of our marriage, I couldn't publicly claim to be her husband or interfere in her life. In return, she would cover all my living expenses and give me a $100,000 monthly allowance. The most important clause. After 1 year, we would divorce amicably, and she would pay me $10 million as a settlement. Any questions? She asked. I looked up, meeting her gaze seriously. That $100,000 allowance. Can I get that monthly? I'm not sure I can spend it all that fast. Her perfectly shaped eyebrows twitched almost imperceptibly. She probably thought I was joking or making a passive-aggressive point. Fine, she said, concise as ever. She got up and tossed a black Amex card on the bed. The PIN is 6 times. It's a supplementary card linked to my account. I've already added your fingerprint to the security system at the house. You can move in whenever you're ready. I don't have many rules. Don't bring trashy people over, don't mess up my house, and don't bother me. With that, she clicked away in her heels, leaving me with a view of her cold, elegant back. I held the black card and sighed. My old man insisted I'd lost touch with the common people and sent me on this mission to experience life and find some deeper meaning. So far, that meaning seemed to be taking a very strange detour. After moving into Isabel's mansion, I fully embraced my new title as a kept man. The house was enormous, 3 stories, complete with a pool and sprawling gardens. The decor was a cool palette of black, white, and gray, much like Isabel herself, lacking any real warmth. A housekeeper named Maria managed the property. Her eyes, whenever they landed on me, were filled with a mixture of pity and a subtle, well-hidden contempt. I didn't mind. My days were peaceful, spent watering the plants and feeding the few koi fish Isabel kept in the pond. The only problem was that Isabel seemed to have forgotten she had a husband. She left before dawn and returned long after dark, so buried in her work that we rarely exchanged a single word. This quiet routine was shattered a week later by the arrival of an unwelcome guest. I was in the garden trying to save a dying fiddle-leaf fig from the sun when a flashy red Ferrari pulled up to the gate. A man in a bespoke suit, his hair slicked back with a little too much product, stepped out. He strode right up to me, looking me up and down like I was a piece of cheap furniture. "You're Ethan Cole." I nodded and kept watering my plant. "I'm Carter Vance," he said, his tone dripping with a superiority he was clearly born with. "A friend of Isabel's." "Oh, right." I remembered hearing Maria gossip about him a few days ago. The heir to the Vance Corporation had been chasing Isabel for years and was widely considered the future husband-in-waiting. And right now, the future husband was looking at the actual husband with a whole lot of hostility. "I heard you and Isabel got married," he said, stuffing his hands in his pockets, his chin tilted up. "Name your price. How much to walk away from her?" I put down the watering can and gave his offer some serious thought. "I'd have to ask my wife about that. The divorce settlement is $10 million, so you'd have to come up with something a little more persuasive, don't you think?" Carter scoffed as if I just told the funniest joke in the world. $10 million? Cole, you've got some nerve. You don't actually believe she's going to spend the rest of her life with you, do you? He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a malicious whisper. "My friends and I have a bet going. I bet that within a month, Isabel will toss you out like trash. Any idea what the pot is?" I shook my head. 5 million, he said, holding up 5 fingers, his face a mask of pure ridicule. Everyone in our circle has placed their bets, and not a single one is on you. You're a joke. You get that, right? I looked at him, and suddenly found the situation hilarious. My 1-month meal ticket was tied to a $5 million wager. So, what happens if I'm not gone in a month? I asked. Carter blinked, then laughed even harder. That's not going to happen. Isabel was just confused for a moment. Once her head clears, you'll be the first piece of trash she takes out. He straightened up, apparently deciding he'd wasted enough time on someone like me, and turned to leave. Mr. Vance, I called out. He glanced back, annoyed. I pointed at his Ferrari. Your car. Sounds like there's a strange noise coming from the front right wheel bearing. You should probably get that checked out. You wouldn't want that failing on the freeway. Carter's face flushed a deep red. He probably thought I was cursing him or would try and claw back a shred of dignity with some pathetic comeback. I don't need a freeloader worrying about my car, he snarled. He shot me one last glare, jumped into the driver's seat, and peeled away with a deafening roar. I shook my head and went back to watering my plant. I hope he'd take my advice. After all, that specific custom wheel was part of a limited global run. A replacement would be a nightmare to find. And, as luck would have it, the company that manufactured it happened to be one of mine. That evening, for the first time, Isabel came home early. She looked exhausted, her expression grim. I poured her a glass of warm water. She took it, sipped, and then looked up at me. Carter Vance came to see you today. He did. What did he say to you? He told me he and his friend are betting I'll be kicked out within a month, I said honestly. Isabel's expression didn't change, but a flicker of apology crossed her eyes. I'm sorry you've been dragged into this nonsense. She put the glass down. Don't pay any attention to them. The agreement is clear. For 1 year, our marriage is legally binding. I nodded. I know, but I still think you should address his problem. What problem? His Ferrari. The wheel bearing is seriously shot, I said with a straight face. Isabel stared at me. She probably thought I was insane. A kept man, worried about the safety of a rich air supercar. She didn't respond, simply changing the subject. I have a gala tomorrow night. You're coming with me. I was taken aback. Doesn't the agreement say I'm not supposed to appear in public as your husband? It's just a standard business gala. Everyone there is in our circle. They already know the situation, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. You are my legal husband, and there are certain occasions that require your presence. Maria will have a tuxedo ready for you. I understood. She was taking me out to parade me around, to quiet the rumors. She might say she didn't care, but Carter and his friends had clearly gotten to her. The next day, Maria presented me with a brand new tuxedo. The cut was perfect, the fabric was high quality, but I didn't recognize the designer. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt a little awkward. It was too formal, not nearly as comfortable as my $10 t-shirts. That evening, I joined Isabel in her Bentley, and we headed to the gala. The car was silent. She was engrossed in a file, and I didn't want to disturb her, so I just watched the city lights blur past the window. When we get there, stay by my side and don't say much, she said suddenly. Okay, if anyone asks what you do, just say, you're a freelancer. Okay, and no matter what they say to you, ignore them. Okay. She seemed satisfied with my obedience. After a moment of silence, she added, don't embarrass me. I sighed internally. This was going to be a long night. The gala was held in a magnificent 5-star hotel, dripping with gold and crystal. The moment we walked in, we became the center of attention. 100 pairs of eyes locked onto us, some curious, some probing, but most filled with undisguised contempt and amusement. I could hear their hushed whispers. Look, that must be Ms. Sterling's husband. He's not bad-looking, but he looks a little cheap. I heard he was just a waiter she picked up when she was wasted. Vance already called it. A month tops and that kid is gone. Isabel's face was a mask of indifference. She kept my arm linked with hers and walked forward without looking left or right. Her hand was cold, and I could feel a slight chill through the fabric of my suit. I gently covered her hand with mine. Her body tensed, and, for a second, I thought she would pull away, but she didn't. Her palm was slick with a thin layer of sweat. So the Ice Queen got nervous, too. It didn't take long for Carter Vance to saunter over, a wine glass in hand. He was wearing an all-white suit, which, combined with his arrogant expression, made him look like a preening peacock. Isabel, you finally made it. He completely ignored me, his eyes fixed on her. I was starting to think you were going to stand me up. Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Vance, Isabel replied, her tone polite but distant. Carter's gaze finally fell on me. He scanned me from head to toe, a mocking smile playing on his lips. Well, Mr. Cole is here too. Nice suit. Fits you well. Did Isabel pick it out for you? She has such excellent taste. The comment was a compliment to Isabel on the surface, but it was a clear jab at me, implying I couldn't even afford my own clothes. I just smiled and said nothing. Isabel's expression darkened. Carter, watch your mouth. Just a joke. Isabel, don't be so tense. Carter raised his glass in my direction. No offense, Mr. Cole. Here, let me toast to you. We're all friends now. We should get to know each other better. His words said one thing, but the challenge in his eyes was unmistakable. Before I could even reach for a glass, a commotion erupted nearby. A man in a hotel manager's uniform hurried toward us, flanked by several security guards. Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance, thank God you're here. The manager was sweating profusely, his face etched with panic. Your car. Something's happened to your car. Carter's brow furrowed. What could possibly happen to my car? Your Ferrari. The one in the VIP parking spot. The front right wheel. It fell off. The manager's voice wasn't loud, but in our little corner of the ballroom, it landed like a thunderclap. Carter's face went from pale white to a deep, blotchy red. The people around us froze for a second, then broke into suppressed snickers. I saw Isabel turn her head away, her shoulders shaking slightly as she tried to stifle a laugh. I sighed, picked up a glass of champagne from passing tray, and took a small sip. I told you to get it checked. Now look, a wheel from a limited edition model gone. Good luck finding a replacement for that. Carter Vance stormed off to deal with his three-wheeled car, leaving the party's atmosphere subtly changed. The people who had been eager to see me humiliated now looked at me with a strange curiosity, as if I weren't just a freeloader, but some kind of dark sorcerer who could curse people's cars. Isabel led me to a quieter corner of the room. Yesterday, how did you know there was a problem with his car? She finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity. I heard it, I said. Heard it. Yeah, the sound of the engine, the friction of the tires on the asphalt, and an abnormal resonance between some of the mechanical parts. Put it all together, and you can get a pretty good idea of what's wrong. It was the truth. I've had a heightened sensitivity to mechanics and sound since I was a kid. I could listen to a recording of an engine and tell you the model, the RPM, and even which cylinder was likely to have carbon buildup. The old man called it gift and forced me to learn a dozen instruments and get dual doctorates in acoustical and mechanical engineering from MIT. The result is that now, whenever a car drives by, my brain automatically runs a diagnostic on it. It's a professional hazard I can't seem to shake. Isabel clearly didn't buy my story. Her cool eyes studied me, trying to gauge my honesty. What did you do before this? She asked. Freelance. I stuck to the script she'd given me. I mean, before you were a waiter. Oh, I fix cars, I lied smoothly. Isabel's expression grew even stranger. She was probably trying to wrap her head around the idea of a simple mechanic diagnosing a faulty wheel bearing on a Ferrari just by listening to it. The whole thing sounded like something out of a fantasy novel. She didn't press further, silently sipping her juice. After a few minutes, a middle-aged man approached us. He was balding, with gold-rimmed glasses and a prominent beer belly, his face a portrait of shrewd business. Ms. Sterling, long time no see, he said with a wide, greasy smile. Mr. Ford. Isabel stood up, responding politely. I vaguely recognized him. He was Martin Ford, a key supplier of raw materials for her company. Ford's eyes darted over to me, then back to Isabel, his smile turning suggestive. Ms. Sterling, and this is my husband, Ethan Cole. Isabel introduced me. Mr. Cole, a pleasure. Martin Ford extended a hand. It was soft and fleshy, his handshake weak. Mr. Ford, if you'll excuse me, I have something to attend to, Isabel said, clearly eager to end the conversation. She took my arm and tried to lead me away. Now hold on, Ms. Sterling, Ford said, blocking her path. Since we're both here, there's a little matter I'd like to discuss. He paused, his smile fading into a look of feigned difficulty. As you know, with the current global market, the price of raw materials is changing daily. About next quarter's supply contract, we might have to raise the price by about 20%. Isabel's brow furrowed instantly. 20%? Mr. Ford, that's extortion. We have a long-term contract. Times change, Ms. Sterling, Ford said with a helpless shrug. I'm in a tough spot myself. If I don't raise prices, I'll go bankrupt. You're a big company, you can absorb the cost. His audacity was breathtaking. I stood by and watched, piecing it together. The guy knew Isabel's company was dependent on his materials, so he was squeezing her for every penny. Impossible, Isabel said, her tone resolute. A contract is a contract. If you decide to breach it, we'll see you in court. Ford's face hardened. Let's not be so hasty, Ms. Sterling. Sterling Industries' entire production line relies on our proprietary alloy. You can't get it from anyone else. If this goes to court, the production delays will cost you a lot more than 20%, won't they? It was a blatant threat. Isabel was so angry her face turned pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was silent because she knew he was right. The core product of her company, a high-precision electronic component, required this special alloy. The formula and manufacturing process were controlled entirely by Ford's company. There were no alternatives on the market. If he cut off her supply, her entire operation would grind to a halt, and the losses would be astronomical. I saw her clenched fists and the slight tremble in her body, and I sighed. The old man told me to experience life, not to stand by and watch my wife get bullied. I took a step forward, positioning myself in front of Isabel, and smiled at Martin Ford. "Mr. Ford, is it?" He shot me a disdainful look. "Who the hell are you? This doesn't concern you." "Who I am doesn't matter," I said, my smile unwavering. "What matters is that I know all about your so-called proprietary alloy." Ford's expression shifted slightly. I continued, "That alloy is primarily composed of titanium, vanadium, and niobium, with trace amounts of yttrium and scandium, synthesized through a specialized electric arc melting process." "Correct." Ford's pupils contracted. I ignored his shock and kept going. "The formula was first conceptualized 30 years ago at Germany's Krupp laboratories, but they could never mass-produce it because the temperature and vacuum requirements were too extreme. It wasn't until 5 years ago that a European joint research lab called Prometheus finally overcame the technical hurdles." "You, how could you know?" The color drained from Ford's face, and his voice began to tremble. "How I know isn't important," I said, leaning closer so only he could hear. "What's important is that I know you were just a low-level assistant in that lab. When the project head resigned, you stole partial, incomplete technical data, came back here, and started your company. Right? That's slander." Ford blustered, but the cold sweat beading on his forehead betrayed him. "You and I both know it's the truth," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Your equipment is a decade out of date. The alloy you produce is full of impurities and highly unstable. You've been getting by on information asymmetry, fooling companies like Sterling Industries that don't know any better. The real Prometheus laboratory has already developed a third-generation product. It costs 1/10 of yours to make and is 5 times more effective." I straightened up, looking down at his ashen face, and delivered the final blow. "And by the way, I should probably mention, Prometheus Labs? I own it." The world went silent. Martin Ford stared at me as if he'd seen a ghost, his mouth hanging open wide enough to fit an egg. His cronies behind him were equally stunned. And behind me, Isabel was completely frozen. I could feel her gaze on my back like a pair of X-rays, trying to see right through me. Oops, I overdid it. My heart sank. The old man had given me one instruction: be discreet. Keep a low profile. And here I was just a few weeks in, blowing my own cover. "Ethan." Isabel's voice trembled slightly. I quickly turned around and offered her my most innocent smile. "You know, I read some articles online once, just making a few wild guesses." Isabel just stared. Yeah, she wasn't buying it. Martin Ford finally snapped out of his shock. He grabbed my arm, his voice shaking uncontrollably. You're really with Prometheus Labs?" No, I just fix cars," I insisted, trying to backtrack. This was a disaster. If I admitted it, my shot at normal life was over. But Ford wasn't convinced. The look in his eyes had transformed from contempt to a kind of fanatical worship, tinged with deep-seated fear. "Sir, you can't be serious. No one outside the core team could possibly know those details. That project was top secret." I rubbed my temples, a headache forming. This was getting complicated. I'd only thrown some spare change at a group of nerdy scientists because I was bored. I had no idea they'd get up to so much. I didn't even know which way the front door of the lab faced. "Mr. Ford, you got the wrong guy," I said, making one last desperate attempt. "No, I couldn't be mistaken," Ford declared. "That aura you have, that refined, back-to-basics, master in disguise aura, it's unmistakable." I glanced down at my $10 t-shirt. "This is a master's aura to you? Your perception might be a little skewed." "Sir, please let me explain." Ford looked like he was about to cry. "I didn't mean to steal the data. I wasn't thinking straight. I'll make it right. I'll sign over all my company shares to you, free of charge. Just please have mercy." With that, he dropped to his knees. I jumped back, grabbing him before he could hit the floor. If he kneeled to me in the middle of this gala, tomorrow's headlines would read, "Shocker. Ice Queen CEO's kept husband is a secret tycoon." So much for my normal life experiment. All right, get up, I hissed. The price hike is off the table. From now on, you honor the original contract and supply Sterling Industries without any trouble. Got it? Yes, yes, of course. No price hike. In fact, I'll drop the price by 30%. No, 50%. Ford nodded so vigorously, I thought his head would fall off. Okay, now get out of here before you cause a scene, I said, waving him away like a fly. Ford scrambled to his feet as if he'd been granted a presidential pardon, wiped his brow, and practically ran away with his entourage in tow. The area fell quiet again, but this time, the way people looked at me was different. If before they saw a sorcerer, now they were looking at a god. Their gazes were a mixture of awe, curiosity, and fear, and it made my skin crawl. I turned to meet Isabel's complicated stare. A car mechanic who knows about alloy formulas? Her voice was quiet, but each word landed like a tiny hammer blow. When you fix cars, sometimes you have to do a little welding, so you pick things up? I explained, my voice straining under the absurdity of a lie. Isabel stared at me for a few long seconds, and then she smiled. It was like watching a glacier melt in the spring sun. The entire ballroom seemed to brighten. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby crowd. No one had ever seen the cold, aloof queen of industry smile with such radiance. Ethan, she whispered, leaning close. The warm puff of her breath tickled my ear. You're a terrible liar. She straightened up, her arm linking with mine again, her expression returning to its usual cool composure. Let's go home. She led me out of the gala, escorted by the stunned and silent stares of everyone in the room. The ride back was different. She didn't look at her files. She just stared out the window at the passing city lights. The silence in the car was heavier, more charged than before. Just as we were pulling up to the house, she finally spoke. Thank you. It took me a second to realize she was talking about what happened with Ford. Don't thank me. I was just protecting my meal ticket, I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She didn't smile. She just turned and looked at me, her gaze serious. Ethan, who are you really? There it was. The ultimate question. I looked into her clear eyes, which perfectly reflected my own image, and sighed. I decided to give her a part of the truth. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 28, an orphan, never had a formal education, just bounced between odd jobs. My last one was as a waiter at your party. This was the false identity I'd created when we filed the paperwork at the courthouse. A shadow fell over Isabel's eyes. She seemed disappointed by the answer. Then how did you know all that? I have a good memory, and I read a lot. I cut her off, giving her my all-purpose excuse. You can find anything online these days, can't you? She fell silent. I knew she didn't believe me, but as long as I didn't admit anything, there was nothing she could do. The car stopped. She got out first, and I followed. At the front door, she paused and looked back at me. That bet. Don't worry about it, she said. You won't be leaving in a month. It was the first time she had ever made me a promise. Watching her walk into the house, I felt a strange new feeling stirring inside me. Maybe being a kept man wasn't so boring after all. The story about Martin Ford spread like wildfire through Isabel's social circle. The rumors about me morphed from useless freeloader to mysterious master in hiding. Some said I was the scion of a reclusive family, out experiencing the world. Others speculated I was a government agent assigned to protect Isabel. Someone even suggested I was a time traveler, which explained my ability to predict things. These ridiculous theories meant that every time I went for a walk, I was met with looks of pure awe. Even the security guard at the gate started calling me Mr. Cole and insisted on giving me organic vegetables from his garden. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Meanwhile, the instigator of it all, Carter Vance, had completely vanished. I heard he had his Ferrari airlifted to the factory in Germany to get a new wheel, only to be told that the patent for that specific model had just been acquired by a mysterious buyer from the East. He could still get one, but it would cost 10 times the price, and he'd have to wait until next year. Carter reportedly smashed his phone on the spot. I heard this news while feeding Isabel's precious koi. And yes, the mysterious buyer was me. I'd had my assistant buy the patent on a whim. It just seemed like a fun thing to do. Isabel's attitude toward me did a complete 180. She no longer ignored me. She started trying to get to know me. She would casually ask what kind of food I liked or what my hobbies were. She started bringing home tacos from that little truck I'd mentioned once, always with a stony expression and a dismissive, it was on the way. But the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes gave her away. Our relationship slowly began to thaw, moving from cold, distant roommates to something with a little warmth. One day, I was tinkering with Maria's new Roomba wondering if I could upgrade its algorithm to detect cat poop. Oh, right. I found a stray ginger cat a few days ago. Isabel had been against it at first, claiming she was allergic. But then the cat, which I named Cash, rubbed his fluffy head against her ankle, and her resolve crumbled. Now, Cash had successfully replaced me as the most spoiled member of the household. Just as I was prying the casing off the Roomba, Isabel came home. She looked more tired than usual, a deep frown etched between her brows. "What's wrong? Trouble at work?" I asked. She shook her head, sinking into the sofa and pinching the bridge of her nose. "It's my family." It was the first time she'd ever mentioned them. I poured her a glass of water and sat beside her, waiting for her to speak. After a long silence, she finally said, "My father wants me to bring you home for dinner next week." "Meeting the parents?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yes." She nodded, her expression darkening. "My father is traditional and a snob. He never wanted me to take over the company. He thinks a woman's place is at home, raising a family. He's furious that I got married without his permission." I got the picture. This wasn't just dinner, it was an ambush. "He's going to do everything he can to humiliate you and force us to divorce," Isabel said, her eyes full of apology. "If you don't want to go, I can tell him you can't make it." "Why wouldn't I go?" I smiled. The humble groom has to meet the in-laws eventually. My attempt at humor earned a small, bitter smile. "Don't take this lightly. My father has been in the business world his entire life. He can read people. Your made-up stories won't fool him." "Don't worry," I said, patting my chest. "I may not have many skills, but playing the fool is my specialty." Isabel looked at me, seeming to want to say more, but in the end, she just sighed. "When we get there, try to say as little as possible." There was again. In her mind, I was still the useless husband who needed her protection. A week later, I stepped through the doors of the Sterling family estate. It was a classic manor, all stone and ivy, with far more character than Isabel's sterile mansion. A formidable-looking middle-aged man was sitting in a large leather armchair in the living room, sipping tea. This had to be her father, Julian Sterling. Beside him sat a gracefully dressed woman, her mother, Eleanor. A young man who looked a few years younger than Isabel was lounging nearby. Her brother, Leo? The moment we walked in, 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me. It felt like an interrogation. "Dad, Mom, Leo," Isabel said, her voice tight. "So, you remember you have a family?" Julian Sterling slammed his teacup down on the table with a sharp crack. "Do you have any respect for me at all?" "Julian, please don't be angry," her mother said, trying to smooth things over. Leo just smirked, eyeing me with amusement. "So this is my brother-in-law. He looks presentable." The words were laced with sarcasm. I smiled and stepped forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, it's a pleasure. I'm Ethan Cole." Julian Sterling grunted and ignored me. His wife, however, managed a strained smile. "Ethan, please have a seat." I didn't hesitate, pulling Isabel down onto the sofa opposite them. "So, you're Ethan Cole?" Julian finally addressed me, his voice booming with the authority of a man used to being in charge. "I hear you were a waiter." I replied. "And what about now? Are you living off my daughter?" The question was brutally direct. Isabel's face went pale, and she started to speak, but I placed a hand on hers to stop her. I looked directly at Julian Sterling, my posture relaxed but my voice firm. "My current job is to manage Isabel's domestic life, ensuring she's in the best possible condition to work every day. From that perspective, you could call me her logistical director. Would you say that position is living off her, sir?" Julian was momentarily speechless. He clearly hadn't expected a waiter to talk back to him with such confidence. Leo snickered from the side. "Logistical director? That's a fancy way of saying house husband. My sister earns billions a year. How much do you make a month?" "Leo, shut up." Isabel snapped. "I don't make much," I answered calmly. "However, if my work enables my wife to earn those billions, I'd say my job has considerable value." Leo's face turned beet red. His attempt to mock me had backfired completely. Julian Sterling stared at me, his eyes narrowing. "Clever words. Cole, I don't care who you are or what lies you use to trick my daughter. I'll tell you this once. The Sterling family has no place for a man with no ambition who leeches off a woman." He paused, picking up a thick binder from the table and tossing it in front of me. "This is the bid proposal for the waterfront redevelopment project. The deadline is next week. If you're as capable as you seem to think you are, you'll win this project for my daughter. If you succeed, I will acknowledge you as my son-in-law. If you fail, you'll sign these divorce papers and get the hell out of my family." I picked up the binder and flipped through it. I knew about the waterfront project. Prime location, a key focus for the city's development over the next few years. Every major firm was fighting for it. The The competition was fierce. Julian Sterling had given me an impossible task. He was certain that a man with my supposed background couldn't possibly understand the complexities of a deal like this. He was trying to force me to back down and walk away from Isabel. I looked at the pages filled with dense data and suddenly smiled. Sir, you're right. Sterling Industries absolutely should win this project, I said. Oh, and you have some brilliant insight to offer. Julian sneered. Not brilliant, no. I placed the binder back on the table. I just think that if Sterling Industries can't win it, then no one else will either. With that, I stood up and pulled a stunned Isabel to her feet. Isabel, let's go. I think we'll skip dinner. I'm worried I won't be able to digest it. And under the bewildered gazes of the three Sterlings, I led Isabel out of the house. The atmosphere in the car on the way back was thick with tension. Isabel was silent, staring out the window, her expression colder than I'd ever seen it. I knew she was angry that I had made a decision for her, angry that I had made such an arrogant boast, pushing the situation to a point of no return. Don't you have anything to say to me? She finally asked as we neared the house, her voice tight with suppressed fury. What do you want me to say? Ethan. She whipped her head around, her voice suddenly sharp. Do you have any idea what you just did? What gives you the right to agree to such an insane demand on my behalf? Do you understand how important the waterfront project is? How fierce the competition is? What do you think this is? Some kind of game? It was the first time she had ever truly yelled at me. I saw the redness in her eyes and sighed internally. I understand, I said. What do you understand? She practically shouted. You understand how to fix cars. You understand how to read a few articles online and pretend to be a genius. You know nothing about how brutal the business world is. Isabel, I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm. I told you, I will win that project for you. With what? Your words. She let out a bitter laugh, full of self-mockery and disappointment. Ethan, I admit, I was starting to see you differently. I even thought that maybe you weren't the person they all said you were. But I was wrong. You're just like them, arrogant, conceited, and completely delusional. The car screeched to a halt in front of the mansion. Without another glance at me, she threw the door open and stormed inside. I sat in the car, watching her disappear through the doorway, feeling a sense of helplessness. I could tell her that the largest investor behind the waterfront project was my own foundation. I could make one call, and the project would be hers. But I couldn't. The moment I told her, the fragile trust and balance we had built would shatter. She would think I'd been playing her for a fool, laughing at her from the very beginning. A woman as proud as her could never accept that her husband was a man she had to look up to. I got out of the car and went inside. The living room was empty. She must have gone to her room. Maria peeked out from the kitchen. Sir, ma'am, did you have a fight? I shook my head. It's nothing. I went to my room, took out my phone, and dialed a number. Hello, it's me. Boss, you finally remembered me. The excited voice on the other end belonged to my global CEO, Tom Callahan. I need you to look into a bid proposal from a company called Sterling Industries for the waterfront project here in the city. Right away, boss. Give me 5 minutes. No, 3. It'll be in your inbox. I hung up and opened my laptop. Moments later, a detailed file appeared. I scanned it and my brow furrowed. The proposal Isabel's team had put together was excellent, well-researched with solid analysis. But they had made a critical error in their financial projections and risk assessment. They were being too conservative. Their maximum bid was projected at $5 billion. According to my intel, their biggest competitor, Carter Vance's family company, had a budget of $5.5 billion. If she went in with this proposal, she would lose without a doubt. I stared at the screen, thinking I couldn't just rewrite it for her. A woman with her pride would never accept it. I had to find a way to make her see the problem herself and come to me for help. The next day, Isabel didn't go to the office. She locked herself in her study and didn't come out all day. Maria said she'd skip breakfast and lunch. I cooked a bowl of seafood risotto and knocked on the study door. Come in, she called out, her voice hoarse. I pushed the door open. The room was hazy with smoke. She was smoking. Several cigarette butts were already extinguished in an ashtray. When she saw me, she quickly put it out, looking flustered. I'm not hungry, she said. You still need to eat. I placed the bowl on her desk. Your stomach is your own. She didn't say anything, just stared at the messy pile of papers on her desk, her eyes vacant. Hitting a roadblock, I asked, feigning ignorance. She didn't seem to hear me, sitting perfectly still. I didn't push, just sat down nearby and pretended to read a newspaper. After a long time, she finally spoke, her voice laced with exhaustion and defeat. Vance Corporation. They've hired Blackwater Capital as consultants. I can't get my hands on their proposal. Blackwater Capital? I almost laughed out loud. Wasn't that the shell company Old Tom set up in the Cayman Islands a few years ago for tax purposes? So this whole time I was competing against myself. So you don't know their bottom line, and you're afraid to make a move? I stated. She nodded. What if I could get you their proposal? I asked tentatively. Her head shot up, a flicker of hope in her eyes that was just as quickly extinguished. That's impossible. Blackwater Security is world-class. How could you possibly? Let me try. I cut her off. Consider it a contribution from your logistical director. With that, I stood up and left the study. Back in my room, I called Tom again. Tom, that Vance proposal. I need you to leak it. Make it look accidental. And make sure it can't be traced back to us. Understood, boss. Playing the hero to save the damsel in distress, are we? Tom's tone was full of giddy curiosity. Just do it, Tom, and cut the commentary. Yes, sir. After hanging up, I looked out at the night sky, feeling a little conflicted. I didn't know if this was the right thing to do, but it was the only way I could think of to help her without revealing myself. Isabel, I thought, don't let me down. The next morning, when Isabel emerged from her study, her eyes were red, but she was buzzing with manic energy. She was holding a flash drive like it was a holy relic. I got it, were the first words she said to me. Got what? I feigned ignorance. The Vance Corporation proposal. She waved the flash drive excitedly. An anonymous email sent it to me in the middle of the night. I've checked it, Ethan, it's real. I nodded, pretending to be happy for her. Why aren't you surprised? She asked, looking at me suspiciously. I told you I'd get it for you, I said with a shrug. She froze, staring at me as if I were an alien. That was you? You actually did it. I just hacked into an email account, is all, I said vaguely. If I told her I'd had Tom send it via a quantum-encrypted satellite uplink, she would probably call the police. Isabel's expression was a whirlwind of emotions. She looked at me as if seeing a complete stranger. Shock, suspicion, curiosity, and was that a hint of admiration? I must have been imagining things. You know how to hack. When you fix cars, sometimes you need a computer to run diagnostics. I taught myself a few things, I said, falling back on my all-purpose excuse. Isabel was silent. She had probably become immune to the magical world of my car repair history. Whatever you did, thank you, she said, taking a deep breath and regaining her usual composure. I owe you one. We're family. No need to keep score, I smiled. She didn't reply, just turned and disappeared back in her study. For the next few days, she practically lived in there. With the Vance proposal as a reference, she and her team worked around the clock, revising their own strategy. My job became delivering 3 meals a day and playing with the cat. Cash was attached to me, always napping on my lap. Every time Isabel saw this, she would get a look of pure envy on her face. But she was too proud to fight me for the cat, so she would sneak in a few cuddles when I wasn't around. Don't ask how I know. Maria had video evidence. The night before the bid presentation, Isabel finally emerged. She had lost weight, but her eyes were shining. It's done, she said, slapping a new, polished binder on the table in front of me, her face glowing with confidence. I picked it up and flipped through it. It was good, very good. Knowing Vance's $5.5 billion limit, she had set her final offer at $5.6 billion, just enough to win without overspending. More importantly, she had added sections to her development plan focusing on green initiatives and community services, major selling points for the city council. The proposal was, for all intents and purposes, perfect. Feeling confident, I asked. Absolutely, she said, her voice firm. Seeing her so energized and proud, I felt genuinely happy for her. This kind of success, earned through her own hard work, was worth so much more than if I had just handed the project to her. Here's to a victory tomorrow, I said, raising my water glass. She raised hers and clinked it against mine. Ethan, she said, her gaze more serious than I'd ever seen it. When I win this project, let's end that bet. I paused. What do you mean? Carter's bet. The 1-month deadline? Tomorrow is the last day, she said. After I win, I'm throwing a celebration party. And I'm going to tell everyone that you are my husband. Not a waiter, not a freeloader, but my husband, loud and proud. My heart skipped a beat. A feeling that was part warmth, part ache, and part sweetness spread through my chest. I looked at her and suddenly thought that maybe the old man was right. Maybe sending me here to find the meaning of life was the best decision he'd ever made. Because I think I just found something more interesting than making money. And it was watching the woman in front of me be proud of me. I didn't go to the presentation. I sat in the garden of the mansion in my usual t-shirt and jeans, sipping tea and watching the live stream on my tablet. Isabel was a vision in a sharp black power suit, her hair pulled back, her presence commanding the room. She stood at the podium, confidently and eloquently presenting her proposal. I watched her on the screen, a smile spreading across my face. Carter Vance was there, sitting in the front row, looking furious. He probably couldn't figure out how his top secret, exorbitantly expensive proposal had been leaked. Julian Sterling sat next to him, his face unreadable. The bidding process went smoothly. As it came to the final offers, Vance Corporation's representative announced their bid, $5.5 billion. A gasp went through the room. Everyone assumed the deal was theirs. Then it was Isabel's turn. She took the microphone, her voice clear and steady. Sterling Industries bids $5.6 billion. The room fell silent. A few seconds later, it erupted in thunderous applause. Carter Vance's face went white. He shot to his feet, pointing at Isabel, but then slumped back into his chair, defeated. Julian Sterling was also stunned, staring at his daughter on the stage with a look of pure shock and disbelief. I knew, in that moment, that we had won. I closed the live stream, stretched, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Cash jumped onto my lap and nuzzled my hand. That's right, Cash. You're getting extra salmon tonight. That afternoon, Isabel returned. The moment she walked through the door, she threw her arms around me in a crushing hug. It was the first time she had ever initiated it. She smelled the city and victory, and her embrace was wonderfully warm. We won, she whispered into my ear, her voice thick with emotion. I know, I said, patting her back. You worked hard for it. She held on to me and cried for a long time, releasing all the stress, frustration, and doubt of the past few weeks. I just held her, letting her tears soak the shoulder of my shirt. When she finally pulled back, I looked at her tear-streaked face and smiled. Your makeup is all smudged. You look like a raccoon. She laughed and playfully punched my arm. There's a party tonight to celebrate. Get ready. You're coming with me. Okay, I nodded. But this time, can I wear my own clothes? She paused. Then a smile touched her lips. Fine. Wear whatever you want. That night, I showed up in my favorite t-shirt and jeans. Isabel just shook her head with a resigned sigh, but didn't say a word. She drove us to the same hotel as before. But this time, we were greeted not with sneers and whispers, but with flowers, applause, and endless congratulations. Employees from her company respectfully addressed me as Mr. Cole. The same business leaders who had looked down on me now approached with glasses in hand, eager to talk. Mr. Cole, you're truly a hidden gem. Ms. Sterling is so lucky to have such a supportive partner. I navigated the empty pleasantries, feeling more exhausted than if I had been dismantling a nuclear bomb. Julian Sterling came too. He walked up to me, studied my face for a long moment, and then raised his glass. Julian Sterling, know when I've lost a bet, he said, his voice deep. From this day forward, you are my son-in-law. I smiled and touched my glass to his. Isabel stood beside me, her face beaming with a pride and happiness I had never seen before. She took my hand, led me to the stage in the center of the ballroom, and picked up the microphone. Everyone, thank you for coming to celebrate with Sterling Industries. Her voice boomed through the hall. But tonight, I have an even more important announcement to make. She turned and looked at me, her eyes full of love. I would like to formally introduce the man beside me, Mr. Ethan Cole. He is not a waiter, and he is not a freeloader. He is my one, my only, and my forever husband. The room erupted in applause. Camera flashes went off like fireworks. I looked at her, and she looked at me. Then, in front of everyone, she stood on her toes and gently kissed me. At that exact moment, the grand doors of the ballroom were thrown open. A woman in a stunning, blood-red dress, radiating an almost dangerous beauty, strode in on 10-centimeter heels, surrounded by a phalanx of black-suited bodyguards. She walked directly to the foot of the stage, took off her sunglasses to reveal a devastatingly beautiful face, and fixed her gaze on me, ignoring everyone else in the room. Then, her red lips parted, and her voice, though not loud, carried to every corner of the silent hall. Ethan, are you done playing games? If you are, it's time to come home. The room was dead silent. Every eye in the place swiveled between me, Isabel, and the woman in red. The air was thick with the delicious scent of scandal. The color drained from Isabel's face. 1 second ago, she had claimed me in front of the world. The next, my apparent real partner had arrived to crash the party. The public humiliation was swift and brutal. I looked at the woman below the stage, and my head started to ache. Victoria Davenport, my nominal fiancée. A woman even more powerful and more difficult than Isabel. She was the granddaughter of my old man's war buddy, and we had been unofficially engaged since we were kids. Half the reason I'd run off to experience life was to get away from her. I should have known she would find me. What are you doing here? I asked, my brow furrowed. You have the nerve to ask me that. Victoria crossed her arms, a cold smile on her face. You disappear for 3 months, ignoring my calls and texts. If you hadn't used your authority at Blackwater Capital, I never would have found you. Blackwater Capital. Isabel's body swayed, and I quickly reached out to steady her. She turned to me, her eyes wide with disbelief. I was screwed. That was the only thought in my mind. Ethan, who is she? Isabel's voice was trembling. I started, but I didn't know how to explain. I'm his fiancée, Victoria answered for me. She stepped onto the stage, inserted herself between us, and forcefully pried Isabel's hand off my arm. Miss, if you don't mind, please step away from my man. Her shove was rough, and Isabel stumbled back. That was it. I was furious. Victoria, have you lost your mind? I yelled, pulling Isabel behind me and glaring at her. Have I lost my mind? Victoria laughed as if I'd told a joke. Ethan, look around. Who's the one making a scene here? You're out playing around with other women. And you married one? You brought shame on the Cole family name. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. The moment she said the Cole family, a wave of gasps went through the crowd. For a woman of Victoria's stature to use that name, there was likely only one Cole family in the entire country she could be referring to. The legendary dynasty that held the reins of the national economy, whose influence was felt across the globe. Every eye in the room was on me again. But this time, the awe was gone, replaced by terror. They finally understood. I wasn't some mysterious figure or a secret agent. I was a god from a pantheon they weren't even qualified to worship. Julian Sterling's wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Isabel's face was as white as a sheet. She stared at me, her lips trembling, unable to form a single word. I knew, in that instant, that my entire charade, all my efforts had been for nothing. The normal life I had so carefully constructed had just been demolished by Victoria's arrival. Victoria, our engagement was just an informal agreement between our grandfathers. It was never official, I said, taking a deep breath and trying one last time to salvage the situation. Besides, I'm married now. Married? Victoria sneered. Ask her if she still wants to be married to a liar. She turned to Isabel, her voice sharp and condescending. Ms. Sterling, is it? Do you have any idea who he is? Do you know how long he's been lying to you? You think you won that project on your own merit? That was my fiancé taking pity on you and pulling a few strings. Everything you have right now is a handout from him. Do you really think you're worthy of him? Every word from Victoria was a knife, twisting in Isabel's heart. Isabel looked like she was about to collapse. She stared at me, her eyes filled with pain, disappointment, and a profound humiliation. Of course, a woman that proud, believing she had won through her own grit and intelligence, only to discover it was all a game arranged by someone else. The fall from that height was enough to destroy her. Ethan, she finally whispered, her voice as faint as a feather. Is what she's saying true? I couldn't answer. My silence was the only answer she needed. She smiled. It was a smile more painful than tears. So, that's how it was, she murmured to herself. Then she looked at me, her voice cold and clear. Ethan, let's get a divorce. The word divorce hit me like a bullet to the chest. It hurt. It hurt more than the shrapnel that had torn through me on a mission in Africa years ago. I looked into Isabel's resolute eyes and knew she wasn't joking. Isabel, listen to me. I can explain. There's nothing to explain. She cut me off, her face devoid of all color. I don't want to hear it. I just have one question. From the very beginning, were you just laughing at me? No, I denied it instantly. Then what was it? An experiment? Or did you just find it amusing to play with a self-important woman like me? Her voice grew colder with every word. I opened my mouth, but I was speechless. How could I explain? That I never meant to deceive her? That I just wanted a few days of a normal life? That I had actually fallen in love with her? In the face of this brutal reality, all of it sounded pathetic and weak. Well, at least you know your place, Victoria chimed in, fanning the flames. A woman like you isn't even fit to shine our Ethan's shoes. Just sign the divorce papers, take the money, and get out of our sight. Victoria, I roared, a rage I had never felt before surging through me. Shut your mouth. My outburst stunned her into silence. I ignored her and grabbed Isabel's hand. Isabel, come home with me. I'll tell you everything. But she pulled her hand away, She didn't use much force, but it felt like the entire world was pushing me back. "There's no need," she said, her eyes terrifyingly empty. "Ethan, we're over." With that, she turned and walked, step by step, off the stage. Her posture, usually so straight and proud, was now fragile and heartbreaking. I tried to go after her, but Victoria held me back, her grip like iron. "Ethan, are you crazy? You're going to defy my grandfather for a woman like that." I watched Isabel's back disappear through the ballroom doors, and I felt my own heart go with her. I ripped my arm out of Victoria's grasp and shot her a look of pure ice. "Victoria, I'm going to tell you this one last time. First, as of today, our engagement is officially over. Second, Isabel Sterling is my wife, and I will not allow anyone to hurt her, including you. And third, if you ever try anything with her again, don't expect me to remember our family's history." My voice was quiet, but each word was laced with a chilling finality. The color drained from Victoria's face. She had known me her whole life and had never seen me like this. Without another glance at her, I turned and raced out of the ballroom. But I was too late. The hotel entrance was empty. Isabel's car was gone. I pulled out my phone and frantically dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. I collapsed onto the steps of the hotel, all refusing to eat or drink, calling her phone over and over like a madman. All I ever heard in response was the cold, mechanical voice of her voicemail. Maria would watch me and secretly wipe away tears. Cash seemed to sense my distress. He stopped his usual playful antics and would just lie quietly at my feet, rubbing his small head against my leg. Julian Sterling called me. His voice sounded decades older. He didn't yell at me. He just asked if I could find his daughter. I told him I would. I would tear the world apart to find her. Victoria came to the mansion once. She stood at the gate, crying, apologizing profusely. I didn't let her in. I told her that whatever had been between us was over. On the 7th day, just as I felt I was about to break, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. With trembling hands, I answered. "Hello." A voice, both familiar and distant, came from the other end. It was Isabel. "Ethan, we need to meet." Her voice was calm, devoid of any emotion. "Where are you?" "I'll come right now." I shot up from the sofa. She gave me an address. A seaside cliff on the outskirts of the city. A cold dread washed over me. "Isabel, don't do anything stupid. Wait for me. I'm on my way." I hung up, grabbed my car keys, and drove faster than I ever had in my life. I ran a dozen red lights, my mind consumed by a single thought. She had to be okay. She absolutely had to be okay. When I reached the cliff, the sun was setting. The orange glow painted the sky and cast a warm light on the side of her face. She was wearing a white dress and standing at the very edge, the sea breeze whipping her long hair around her. She looked like an ethereal spirit about to ascend into the heavens. My heart seized in my chest. "Isabel!" I shouted, running toward her. She turned and, seeing me, offered a faint smile. "You came. Get over here. It's dangerous." I held out my hand, my voice shaking. She shook her head. "Don't come any closer, Ethan." Her eyes were as still as a deep, dark pool. "I asked you here today to put an end to this." From her bag, she pulled out 2 documents. One was a signed divorce agreement. The other was a stock transfer certificate for Sterling Industries. I've already signed the divorce papers. Sterling Industries was my father's life's work, and it was my everything. "Now, I'm giving it to you," she said. "Consider it. Payment for the trouble I've caused you." "I don't want it." I yelled. "I don't want any of it. I just want you. Do you really think we can go back to how things were?" She gave a self-deprecating laugh. "Ethan, you're on a level so high. I don't even have the courage to look up. Being with you just makes me feel like a pathetic, pitiful clown." "That's not true. Isabel, in my eyes, you were never a clown. You're the strongest, most brilliant, most dazzling woman I've ever met." I explained desperately. "I love you. It has nothing to do with your status or your family. I love you." "Love." She said the word as if it were a joke. "Is your love just one big, elaborate lie?" "I don't." She cut me off. "I've made my decision. From this day forward, you and I are finished." With that, she tossed the 2 documents over the cliff. They fluttered in the air like 2 white butterflies before being swallowed by the wind. Then, she turned her back to me and opened her arms. "No!" A primal scream tore from my throat. I launched myself forward, every muscle straining. In that moment, my entire world was her defiant, white-clad back against the sunset. A second before I would have crashed into her, she stepped back from the edge. She turned, a mischievous smile spreading across her face as she looked down at me, sprawled pathetically on the ground. "Just kidding," she said. I stared. For a full 10 seconds, My brain couldn't process her words. Then, a tidal wave of boundless rage mixed with the ecstatic relief of getting her back crashed over me. Isabel Sterling. I scrambled to my feet, pulled her in my arms, and held her so tightly I felt like I could merge our bodies into one. Do you have any idea what I've been through these past few days? Do you know I was going insane? I know, she mumbled into my chest. Maria told me everything. Then why would you? How else was I going to get you to say what you really feel? She looked up, her eyes sparkling. Ethan, what you said just now, that you love me, was that true? I didn't answer with words. I just lowered my head and crushed my lips to hers. It was a kiss of punishment, of longing, and of all the love I had in me. We stayed like that for a long time, until we were both breathless. Do you believe me now? I asked, my forehead resting against hers. Her cheeks were flushed. She nodded. So, are we still getting a divorce? She shook her head. And the stock transfer? Fake. Cost me $2 at a copy shop. I stared at her sly grin. I was half furious, half deliriously happy. I gave her a light swat on the behind. You're a bad influence on yourself. I'll learn from the best, she shot back. We looked at each other and smiled. All the misunderstandings, all the distance between us, vanished in that embrace. As the sun sank below the horizon, we walked back, hand in hand. Are you really? From that Cole family? She finally asked. Yeah. Then why? Because I was bored. I cut her off. Money, power. They're just numbers to me. I wanted a real life, real feelings. So I ran away. And then you ran into me? Yeah. Then I ran into you, I said, squeezing her hand. It was the best decision I ever made. She smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. So, what about Victoria? I made things clear with her, I said. From now on, I only have one wife. She nodded, satisfied. Then, as if remembering something, she stopped. By the way, about that bet. Isn't it time to collect? What bet? I asked, confused. Carter Vance's bet, she said, her eyes glinting playfully. He bet you'd be gone within a month. Well, a month is up, and not only are you still here, you've managed to steal my heart. Don't you think he owes me the house, the $5 million pot? I looked at her greedy, triumphant expression and burst out laughing. All right, let's go collect our winnings. Deal, she said with a firm nod. The setting sun stretched our shadows long behind us. I looked at the woman beside me, sometimes as cold as a mountain, sometimes as clever as a fox, sometimes as fragile as glass, and sometimes as strong as steel, and my heart felt full. So this was the meaning of life. It wasn't about owning the world. It was about having one person who was your world, a person you would do anything for, a person who could make you laugh. And my world's name was Isabel Sterling. Epilogue 1 year later. The CEO's office at Sterling Industries. Honey, Vance Corporation is trying to outbid us on that new South American project. It's so annoying, Isabel said, massaging my shoulders as she complained. I kept my eyes closed, enjoying my wife's expert service. Oh, really? I can have Tom Callahan acquire their company if you want. No, Isabel said instantly. No. I opened my eyes. Where's the fun in that? She said, leaning over my shoulder and whispering in my ear. I want to crush them myself. But you could secretly leak me a little bit of their inside information. Just a little. I looked at her sparkling eyes and laughed. You're incorrigible. Just then, there was a knock on the office door. My chief assistant, the same Tom Callahan I used to find insufferably chatty, walked in with a grim expression. Boss, ma'am, we have an urgent situation. What is it? I asked. A strange look crossed Tom's face. Ms. Victoria Davenport. She's here, at the company, and she's brought a child with her. She says, the child is yours.